When we think about wildlife conservation success stories, one prominent example is often overlooked. The wild turkey's reestablishment across the American landscape is a fantastic example of what can be accomplished with mutual interest and cooperation among diverse stakeholders. During the 1930s, there were less than 30,000 wild turkeys left across the United States, whereas today that number is closer to 7 million. This video will focus on one specific subspecies in North Carolina, the eastern wild turkey. Wild turkeys were an important resource for Native Americans and were plentiful on the landscape as European settlers colonized North Carolina. However, habitat destruction through deforestation and unregulated harvest decimated populations by the middle of the 20th century. In 1970, only about 2,000 wild turkeys remained in North Carolina. However, an intensive restoration program implemented by the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission was extremely successful. By 2015, the population had recovered to over 265,000 turkeys. This program relocated over 6,000 wild turkeys around the state, in addition to halting the fall hunting season, thereby giving populations a chance to stabilize and recover. Let's begin with a brief overview of the life history of a wild turkey. Turkeys feed opportunistically. Most of their diet is plant-based, the specifics of which vary geographically and by season. In North Carolina, some preferred forage includes acorns, beechnuts, the fruits of black cherry or wild grapes, seeds of flowering dogwoods or hawthorn, and native forbs, grasses, and sedges. About 10% of the turkey diet is insects or small invertebrates, and specifically, insects are critical to the diet of young turkeys, called poults. The first long days of spring stimulate increased hormone production in turkeys, and thus ring in the beginning of breeding season. Toms strut their stuff in courtship displays, fanning their tail feathers and gobbling for attention from females. Reproduction is polygamous, so one tom may fertilize several hens. For a nest, hens scratch shallow depressions into the ground and lay on average a dozen eggs over a 2-week period. Eggs are incubated for around 27 days, and most hatch in mid-May. The young turkey poults grow and learn quickly, as they are most vulnerable while flightless. Most will be flying and roosting in trees within 2 weeks. Predation is a major cause of mortality, particularly for hens and poults. Less than 10% of poults survive their first month of life. If an individual makes it past that critical first month, then survival in adulthood is quite high, the exception being hens during nesting. Snakes, crows, skunks, weasels, foxes, owls, raccoons, coyotes, and bobcats all target turkey eggs and/or young as an easy meal. Bobcats and coyotes are the main threats to adults, although a turkey's keen eyesight and overall wary demeanor help keep them alive. The average lifespan is 3 to 5 years, and toms tend to live slightly longer than hens, except where hunter-harvest is high. Wild turkeys are non-migratory year-round residents of North Carolina. They spend the majority of the year in single-sex flocks that range in size to 5 to more than 50 individuals. The home range for a flock varies dramatically based on the availability of food and cover, and can be as small as a couple hundred acres in high-quality habitat to over several thousand acres when resources are scarce or widely dispersed. Turkeys have complex habitat needs corresponding to each stage of that diverse life history. These needs can be broken down into 5 components: access to food, access to water, nesting cover, roosting cover, and brood rearing cover. Turkeys need access year-round to food and water. They will drink out of seeps, lakes, ponds, or streams, but standing water must be present and accessible regardless of the season. Turkey nests are often located at the base of a large diameter tree or some other obstruction in forest stands with dense understory vegetation. Though fully obstructed from view from at least one side, nest sites typically have an opening in one direction to allow the hen to escape approaching threats. The ideal height of understory vegetation is between 14 to 16 inches, hiding the nest but allowing the hen to see approaching predators. In addition, turkeys select nests near forest openings or early succession vegetation, where poults will have easier access to the insects they need at an early stage of life. Toms and hens without broods roost overnight in trees. Continuous mature, open canopy forest is ideal roosting cover, with turkeys particularly favoring stands of trees next to or over standing water. A female turkey with a brood must roost on the ground for the first 2 weeks, after which time the young turkeys will be able to roost in a tree with the hen. This ground roosting period leaves both the hen and brood vulnerable to high rates of predation, so appropriate ground cover is critical. ground roosting broods seek shelter under large trees with dense understory. Proper brood rearing cover is essential to the survival of poults in their first 6 to 8 weeks of life, when they are their most vulnerable. Ideal brood cover is forest openings, lush riparian areas or mountain coves, or early successional vegetation dominated by grasses, forbs, and open at ground level. These areas contain herbaceous plants that provide overhead cover with space to walk around at ground level, often termed umbrella cover. Forbs are a critical component of brood cover because they harbor the insect foods that are needed to meet the protein demands of the growing poults. Although we just investigated these habitat components independently, there's obviously no such delineation in nature. An ideal turkey habitat needs to be an interspersion of all these components. Successful reproduction will require appropriate foraging, nesting, brood rearing, and roosting cover all within close proximity to one another. Diversity is key when it comes to turkey habitat management. Landowners interested in increasing turkey numbers should focus on the limiting factor, which is often brood rearing cover. Uneven-aged management using group selection or generation harvests inherently creates the diverse structural requirements needed for breeding cover. Even-aged management can also be appropriate as long as interspersed patches are managed differently and tribal corridors facilitate movement between different cover types. Any harvest, including thinning, that increases sunlight penetration on the forest floor will provide important food and cover resources in the understory. Some mass-producing overstory trees, especially oaks, should be retained during harvest. Prescribed fire benefits wild turkeys because it limits midstory encroachment and fosters increased herbaceous plant cover, greater understory mass production, and oftentimes insect abundance or availability. Hence, target areas burned 2 to 3 years prior for nesting and foraging turkeys are well documented to move into very recently burned areas to forage on invertebrates or seeds exposed on the soil surface. Riparian areas should ideally be buffered from timber harvest and cattle grazing to maintain high-quality brooding and roosting cover. In landscapes with extensive closed canopy forests, power lines provide important food and cover for hens with broods. Spot application of herbicides to undesirable tree and shrub species can keep these areas in early successional vegetation. Given the wild turkey's brush with extirpation from North Carolina, it's pretty amazing that this bird is now ubiquitous enough across the landscape to be considered a pest in some suburban neighborhoods. Additionally, the population now supports a thriving hunting industry. However, land managers must continue to actively manage for wild turkeys to protect this legacy for future generations and avoid missteps of the past.